From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. Our top story tonight is about the attack on mosques in the U.S. and Canada. A bloody pig's head mask and a hateful message were left outside an Austin, Texas mosque. Thieves broke into a masjid in Calgary, Canada, stealing valuables, and vandals defaced a sign at the entrance of a Michigan Islamic center. These violations occurred over a weekend of solemn remembrance on the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, and they have left members of those communities on edge. NBC affiliate KXAN reports that worshippers at the Austin Islamic Center and School found the hate message outside at about 1 a.m. on Saturday. The message read, "Muslims, you are as unclean to God as a pig is to you. Have your idolatry washed clean by the blood of Jesus Christ." Longtime member Walid Haider said the act made him feel like a stranger in his own country. Haider said he is proud to be an American. He spent his life worshiping and attending school at the mosque. Elsewhere in the city, members of the North Austin Muslim Community Center held a National Day of Remembrance on Saturday. It included a COVID vaccine clinic and free hot meals. On September 11, 2001, there were about 1,200 mosques in the United States. That number nearly doubled by 2010 and rose to about 3,000 by last year. With the growing Muslim population in the U.S., there has also been a rise in vandalism, criminal acts, and threats against mosques. Armed protests in front of these houses of worship have also become an ordinary occurrence in some states. The ACLU has created an interactive map to keep track of such incidents. As well, efforts to expand and open new mosques have led to strong opposition. Mosque opponents often claim their objections are based on practical concerns such as traffic, parking, and noise levels, but those are often pretexts masking anti-Muslim bigotry. Government officials in some parts of the country have sometimes given in to this prejudice. The ACLU reports that they treat mosques and Islamic centers differently than other proposed religious sites. The most infamous of these was the proposed Cordoba house, dubbed the Ground Zero Mosque by Islamophobes in 2009. It became a national political issue, with some politicians likening the project to a victory mosque for terrorists. The center was never built. That battle stoked conspiracies about Muslims. Some believe it may have even spurred the presidency of Donald Trump. Al-Qaeda chief Ayman al-Zawahiri has resurfaced in a video released to mark the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. This comes amid rumors of his death. Al-Qaeda's As-Sahab media released the hour-long video of Zawahiri, in which he primarily discussed Palestine, but he also mentioned Kashmir in his speech. It is the second time in recent weeks Al-Qaeda has referenced the region in its statements. Al-Qaeda, in its congratulatory message to the Taliban for taking over Afghanistan, had called for the liberation of Kashmir. A new FBI report describes multiple connections between two Saudi nationals living in the U.S. and some of the 9/11 hijackers, but it provides no evidence of direct involvement by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. On Saturday, the FBI released a document related to its probe of the September 11, 2001 attacks. The 16-page document, which was written in 2016, remains heavily redacted. It is the first of several classified records expected to be released in the coming months following an executive order by President Joe Biden. CNN reports that the document provides details of the FBI's investigation into alleged logistical support provided by a Saudi consular official and a suspected Saudi intelligence agent to at least two of the 9/11 hijackers. NPR noted that while the 9/11 Commission report, released in 2004, was largely unable to tie the Saudi men to the hijackers, the FBI document describes multiple connections and phone calls. An upstate New York hospital will stop delivering babies later this month. This is after 30 employees quit in protest of a COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Lewis County Health System CEO Gerald Kyer said Friday that Lewis County General Hospital will be unable to safely staff its maternity department beginning September 25th. Kyer said with the number of resignations, the hospital had no choice but to pause delivering babies. The new death average has reached more than 1,600 cases per day in the U.S. Qatar's Foreign Minister and Deputy Premier Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani arrived in Afghanistan yesterday for a brief visit. This makes him the first high-ranking government official to meet the interim Taliban government since its takeover of the country last month. Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen tweeted that Mullah Hassan Akhund, the acting prime minister, and a number of senior acting ministers met Al Thani at the presidential palace in Kabul. Shaheen said the meeting focused on bilateral and international relations, humanitarian aid, and economic development. Qatar's foreign ministry said the leaders discussed ways of promoting peace in Afghanistan and the operation of Kabul airport to ensure freedom of passage and travel. Both sides stressed the importance of efforts to combat terrorist organizations. Athani urged Taliban officials to engage all Afghan parties in a national reconciliation. He also met with Abdullah, a senior official in the previous Afghan government, as well as former Afghan President Hamid Karzai. Qatar hosted the Taliban's political office, which oversaw negotiations with the U.S. last year. These led to the withdrawal of foreign troops from Afghanistan. Humanitarian aid from 5 countries arrived in Afghanistan on Thursday. After 20 years of war, the country is now in a severe economic crisis. Poverty is widespread in the capital, Kabul, with people begging for bread to survive. Abdul Hadi Hamdarda is an official at Hamid Karzai International Airport. He said 4 planes from Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Pakistan arrived with supplies of food and medicine. He noted that Afghanistan also received aid from neighboring Turkmenistan by road. Hundreds of people arrived in Kabul in August when the Taliban took control of provincial capitals. They are sleeping in Shahr-e-Nau Park, some in plastic tents, without enough money to return home. The Taliban's acting culture and information minister, Zabihullah Mujahid, announced an interim administration on Monday, as well as the establishment of a Ministry of Refugees. In related news, the United Nations Development Programme warns that 97% of Afghans could fall below the poverty line by the middle of next year. Prolonged drought, the COVID-19 pandemic, and political upheaval are partly to blame. Half of the country is already in need of humanitarian aid. As well, the disruption of Afghanistan's trade and the freeze on foreign reserves have contributed to a rapid rise in poverty, according to the UN program. Here is UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in Geneva, speaking to ministers gathered for a donor conference for Afghanistan.
The people of Afghanistan need a lifeline. After decades of war, suffering, and insecurity, they face perhaps their most perilous hour.
The UN Secretary General called for $600 million in emergency funding. Israeli warplanes carried out airstrikes on 3 separate areas of blockaded southern Gaza, sources said earlier today. Anadolu agency reports Israel attacked Rafah, Khan Yunis, and Beit Lahia. The Israeli army has not commented on the attacks. There have been no reports of casualties. On Sunday, Israel said 3 rockets fired from Gaza within the last 48 hours were destroyed by its Iron Dome air defense system. In the meantime, Gazans protested in support of Palestinian jailbreakers. Palestinians burned an Israeli flag during a sit-in protest in Gaza City in support of the 6 Palestinian prisoners who escaped from a high-security prison last week. Israel has recaptured 4 of the 6 jailbreakers after the army poured troops into the occupied West Bank in a massive manhunt. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. In one of our previous segments, we talked about the end of U.S. occupation of Afghanistan after 20 years. Let's watch.
The last of U.S. forces left Afghanistan, ending a 20-year presence. This has been the longest U.S. war seen, and it saw the death of over 300,000 people, including over 6,000 American soldiers and contractors. The final flight left Kabul airport a day earlier than projected. The Taliban who fought the US declared victory and are in full control of the Kabul airport. To discuss the complete withdrawal from Afghanistan, we have with us Matthew Ho. Matthew is a senior fellow at the Center of International Policy. He's a former Marine in Iraq and is a State Department, or was a State Department official in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Ho.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to first start off with your own personal feelings as you watched that final plane leave the Kabul airport.
Well, it's the feelings I have are simply anger and sadness. There's no celebration, even though myself and many others have been working for a long time to see this moment. Many people who are watching this program have been waiting for this moment for a long time, for the U.S. military occupation to end. There's no celebration. There's only feelings of sadness and anger. For myself, regret for having taken part in these wars. There's anger at what has occurred, what is continuing, what may come, sadness along those same lines. As well as frustration that so much of the United States right now, the focus is on the end of the war, as if August 30th, 2021 was the end of problems for the people of Afghanistan. It's the same type of problem you have when you say the war in Afghanistan starts on September 11th, 2001. It's incomplete and it's inaccurate. And I think there's frustration I have on that because the people of Afghanistan are in dire circumstances. They are already, before the Taliban takeover, they're the second most food insecure people in the world. More than 90% are below the poverty line. 70% live on less than $1 a day. It's a very desperate situation in Afghanistan. The war may not be over because there are still warlords who oppose the Taliban. So the situation for Afghans is a very difficult one. And none of us have crystal balls and can tell what will happen in the future. So there's also this great anxiety as well about what may come to pass.
Let's talk a little bit about the real cost of this war. There's been hundreds and thousands of lives that have been lost. But what have been other costs of this war?
Well, thank you for bringing it up because it's something that gets said in passing in American media. And oftentimes the numbers are inaccurate or baselines are very conservative. You'll hear quite recently that 170,000 Afghans have been killed in this war. And that's simply not true. Many times that I believe the estimates of the last 20 years of deaths in Afghanistan, along with Pakistan, because the two wars are so closely integrated in many ways. The reporting on deaths from credible sources, not from guys like me, but from universities, from medical journals like The Lancet, from journalists who have done a lot of research, is that you're looking at about probably between 1 million and 2 million dead over the last 20 years in Afghanistan and Pakistan. All told, in the U.S. wars in the Muslim world, you're looking anywhere from 3 to 6 million killed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, all throughout Africa, Somalia, Libya, etc. So the consequences of this war have been catastrophic, and the suffering can't be quantified. The vast amounts of suffering, continues as Afghans have been subjected. At first, they were subjected under the Taliban to a theocratic repressive government, and these last 20 years, they have been subjected to a predatory kleptocratic government that is also repressive. And what will come with this new Taliban rule is still to be seen. It is unknown. So I think it's very difficult to talk about the costs, particularly for those of us here in the United States that are so far removed from it. We do know in terms of U.S. costs, in terms of U.S. casualties, that I will say the entire number because it's so difficult to separate the Iraq War from the Afghan War. Number of U.S. service members who were killed directly in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are more than 7,000. More than 8,000 contractors were killed in these wars. It's important to include the contractors because in any previous wars, these were men and women who would be wearing military uniforms, as well as we know that more than 10,000 combat veterans have been killed by suicide since coming home as a direct result of the war. So you're looking at total U.S. deaths in these wars at approximately, or at least 25,000. As well as too the invisible wounds of these wars. More than 500,000 American veterans have traumatic brain injury as a result of these wars. That demonstrates the amount of violence that these wars, the amount of violence that was occurring in these wars. I mean, 500,000 men and women have come back home from the United States, had these traumatic brain injuries. Majority of those traumatic brain injuries have been caused by explosive blasts, because in these wars, because of body armor and vehicle armor, American soldiers were able to survive, basically walk away from explosions that in any previous war would have killed or maimed them. So we have hundreds of thousands of men and women who are suffering with traumatic brain injury. And if you go back to the Afghans, the Iraqis, the Syrians, etc., remember, those people didn't have body armor or vehicle armor. So the same must be said for the Iraqis, the Afghans, the Syrians, the Yemenis, that the cost is simply unquantifiable. In terms of dollar cost, it is trillions of dollars. Again, it's very hard to separate the Iraq War from the Afghan War. You can say that the the Afghan War direct costs were $2.2 trillion, but that leaves out a lot. I mean, we know that just 5 American contractors, 5 American defense corporations received $2 trillion in the last 20 years alone. So there has been an explosion. People have profited greatly from these wars. The looting of the American treasury that occurred because of these wars is just simply astronomical. Even the amount of money that was spent on the Afghan reconstruction efforts, the $150 billion or so that was spent by the United States to supposedly rebuild Afghanistan, which of course was a colossal failure. That $150 billion, we know from the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, who was congressionally appointed, that of that $150 billion, approximately 80% of that money never left the United States or returned to the United States. So there were plenty of people who profited, plenty of institutions and corporations that got powerful, saw their budgets expand, earned profits, et cetera. So that is one thing I think we can quantify, is how wealthy certain individuals and corporations became because of these wars.
Definitely. And I can tell you one cost that is often not either it's not quantifiable, but is often not noted, is the global Islamophobia that spread around the world because of these 2 wars post 9/11. How many Muslim children bullied in schools, how many hijabs pulled off. I mean, this is something that often does not get even tallied. And how many other countries have used this war on terror, Burma, China, India, and are persecuting their minorities. So, but as we go on, who do we hold accountable for this war? And you've worked for the State Department, is there any accountability inside the State Department? The experts who wrote the white papers on Afghanistan and Pakistan, where is the accountability?
There is no accountability. There's none. The only people who have been held accountable have been people who have spoken out against this war, who've tried to tell the truth of these wars. John Kiriakou, who went to prison for confirming the American torture program. The only person who was ever punished for the American torture program was John Kiriakou, the man who spoke out about it and exposed it. Daniel Hale, who is currently in prison now, a young man who took part in the drone program, and regrets and is ashamed of his participation in that drone program and trying to repent for his participation in it, leaked a trove of documents detailing what the United States drone program actually looked like, including the fact that the United States government knows that 90% of the people its drones kills are not intended targets, which means that they are civilians, they are innocent. These are the men who are, these people are punished. Daniel Hale is in prison now because he told the world the truth about these wars, about these drones. Say the same for Chelsea Manning, the same for Julian Assange, et cetera, et cetera. And meanwhile, there is no accountability. And it's just not that these people in the government got this wrong, in the media got this wrong, the think tanks that are funded by the weapons companies and the fossil fuel companies and by foreign governments, not just that they got this wrong and continually got this wrong, but they lied about it. This was a concentrated, systemic lying that occurred all throughout these wars to not only justify the wars, but the creation of these wars, the beginning of these wars, but to justify their sustainment and their continuity. So it's not only the fact that they got these wars wrong, but that they purposefully and willfully lied as part of a process to hide the wars, to hide the reality of the wars, and to cover up for the war's immorality and the shame that should actually befall the United States for these wars. So it's deeper than even holding accountable for being wrong. It's trying to keep people accountable for lying.
I also wanted to ask you, as you're watching this, what has the U.S. left behind in terms of arms and weapons? I know majority of the personnel have been pulled out, and there are some Americans, they said, that didn't make it to the airport in time for the cutoff date. What else has been left behind?
Gosh, the United States left behind so much in terms of military equipment that had been provided to the Afghan army and the Afghan police. You're talking about all kinds of vehicles, all kinds of weapons, not just small arms, but heavier weapons, helicopters. And this, of course, is now in the possession of the Taliban. Some of those items were made to be inoperable, such as some of the aircraft, but some were not. So the United States materially left behind quite a lot. But the United States often also left behind many of its allies. There are tens of thousands of Afghans who worked with the United States, who the United States made promises to that they would take care of, that they would assist, that they would not leave behind. And that's exactly what the United States has done. And that's not a consequence of the Joe Biden administration in these last few months. This issue with Afghan allies goes back to the Barack Obama administration. As early as 2013, veterans groups and human rights groups were saying, you have to do something about the people that are working for us in Afghanistan. And the United States government as a whole, Democrats and Republicans, Congress, the executive branch, the military, et cetera, simply failed out because they did not want to do anything to help these people. It's just that simple. If you have a process where people worked with us, our military, where you have military officers, you have development officers, you have diplomats who would attest that, yes, these people worked with us, these people would have given our lives for us, but then they have to go through an 850-day long process to get a visa, and hardly any of them are approved. That is just a question of will, and it shows the real intentions of the United States in Afghanistan was never to help the Afghan people. This was about expanding and maintaining the American empire and addressing, political opportunism for both Democratic and Republican presidents.
It's hard to talk about this war in many, many aspects, especially as a Muslim woman, and especially to see how Afghan women and Muslim women are treated like a trophy, right? To be won through these wars, the savior complex. And we're seeing it again. We're seeing this narrative again. Are you seeing it, and how do you respond to that?
Yes. And my question is, where were these people who were concerned about the Afghan women over the last 20 years? Like, there's no question the Taliban are brutal in their misogyny, and that what is befalling Afghanistan is a tragedy. But the last 20 years have been a tragedy as well. The United States took brought into power the same warlords and drug lords that the Taliban disposed of. These were men that were brutal, criminal. They were war criminals as well as common criminals, but they were also incredibly misogynist. The human rights violation of the Afghan government over the last 20 years is absolutely legionary. The Afghan government, the Afghan government's misogyny may not have been as theatrical as the Taliban. They were not executing women in stadiums or stoning them in public, but they were still allowing forced marriages. They were still allowing men to rape their wives. They were still imprisoning women who were raped, rather than imprisoning the rapist. The misogyny was there, as well as a multitude of other human rights violations. The sexual abuse of children and the trafficking of children within the Afghan military and government, within these warlord circles, was not a rare occurrence. It's well documented that this was a common occurrence, that this was a systemic issue, this raping and trafficking of children. And U.S. military officers who tried to do something about it were actually punished by the U.S. military for trying to stop that child trafficking and child rape. In terms of other issues, between 1/3 and half of all Afghan government prisoners were tortured. So yes, the Taliban were awful. I am heartbroken for the Afghan people that this is the situation, the circumstances they are in, that basically they are back to where they were 20 years ago in many ways. Maybe not. We'll see. I don't have a crystal ball. However, the fact that the idea that somehow the last 20 years was a period of progress and human rights and just an era, a golden era in Afghanistan is completely false. And, so the thing I ask to those who are speaking out for women now is, have you been speaking out for women for the last 20 years? Because many of them have not. Many of them have simply ignored the situation because it was convenient. This has to do with a lot of corruption within our own human rights organizations, because a lot of our own human rights organizations are not independent. They take money from the American government. They take money from European governments. They take money from American corporations that have interests in these wars. So you see many, even human rights organizations that were afraid to criticize the Afghan government for its own human rights abuses, because that would conflict with the American narrative. And because if you conflict with that narrative, maybe you're afraid that your funding from the American government or American corporations will run dry. So I think there is a lot of blame to go around for the fact that the honest reporting, thorough reporting, holding the Afghan government accountable these last 20 years, there's a lot of blame to go around for why that was not done.
Final question. What's next? I recently saw a tweet about an American, I don't know the name of the plane, but it was a gigantic looking plane. And it's been seen in Pakistan, and questions on Twitter whether a new base was being formed in Pakistan to fight ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan through Pakistan, or what is next? What's next for relations between U.S. and the Taliban, and what's next for Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Well, unfortunately, unless Joe Biden strikes a path of moral courage that I don't expect him to, the relations between the United States and Afghanistan will be totally dependent upon American public opinion and what is being said on the various cable media channels, et cetera. Joe Biden has taken a tremendous political beating for the Afghan war these last few months. He was entirely right to do what he did. But the problem now is that he appears weak. And will he now try and appear tough in future dealings with with Afghanistan, and in particular Taliban? Afghanistan is in a desperate situation, as said earlier. You're talking about a country that has no economy. The only industry is the narcotics trade. People, millions, the vast majority of people live subsistently. Afghanistan's federal budget, government budget, is sustained for the most part by outside aid. So Afghanistan and the Taliban need money to keep coming in. And if they do not receive that, if it is cut off or continues to remain cut off, the economic situation, which is already an economic collapse, basically, will only get worse. So there are two paths. One, there can be this cruel and bitter peace where the Taliban have won this phase of the war, and that brings a cessation of violence. There has been reporting that the Taliban are in communication with the warlords they are fighting in an attempt to negotiate some type of deal. And I hope that comes through, because as cruel and as unjust that is, at least it will stop the violence or diminish the violence greatly. And if you have a break in that cycle of violence, then you can have the opportunity to rebuild and reconcile. If you continue with this war, it will only look as it has the last 40 plus years in Afghanistan, with a few people profiting, a few people gaining from this war, and the vast majority of Afghans suffering. To your point about the possibility of the United States building a base in Pakistan, and absolutely, the American CIA has a long history with these warlords that are still fighting the Taliban. I can guarantee you that there are people in Washington, D.C. right now who are saying, look, the map of Afghanistan doesn't look much different than it did on September 11th, 2001. We were successful in taking the Taliban out of power back then. We can do it again, and in the great spirit, right, of American hubris, arrogance, and ignorance, we can do it better this time. So that is the danger the Afghan people face. Aside from this economic collapse, aside from being isolated from the world, aside from having no infrastructure, industry whatsoever, there's the very real danger that the Americans may decide through their CIA to continue the war via these warlords, which of course will just allow the last 40 years to continue new phases of violence and slaughter and destitution to occur. And we have to understand this, and I believe we were referencing this earlier, and you were in your comments in terms of that. Look, this war is one part of the larger American global war on terror, as it's called. I prefer to call it the United States war in the Muslim world, because it stretches from West Africa all the way to Pakistan. And what you see, the way this war is conducted throughout, literally at least 15 countries, probably more, the United States uses secret forces. It uses CIA. It uses special operations. It uses drones. It uses contractors, because contractors are not accountable like the American government is. Contractors can do whatever they want, and no one can kind of provide oversight on them. And then finally, they use proxy. The United States uses proxy forces in Afghanistan. Throughout this war, these wars, these proxy forces, which are government forces and which are militias, and they are the ones who do the bleeding. They are the ones who do the bulk of the killing. And as long as it's not Americans being killed in these wars, the U.S. public doesn't notice, the Congress doesn't really care, and the American media doesn't publicize it, because as long as it's black people killing black people, brown people killing brown people, it doesn't matter to the majority of the United States. And it falls into that narrative, right? That really insipid, disgusting, obscene narrative that these people have been killing themselves, have been killing each other forever, which of course is completely untrue, and allows for the washing of hands of American responsibility and culpability in all these wars, many of them instigated by the United States, or if not instigated, certainly sustained by the United States.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Matthew. It was great talking to you, and hopefully we can have you back someday.
Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. To discuss the post-9/11 impact on American Muslims and the no-fly list by the FBI, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Samana. After 9/11, a whole lot of people have difficulty flying. Actually, flying while Muslim was a phrase, or so was the driving while Muslim. They will be just a staff for no reasons. But as things went on, multiple lists came into being, and one of the lists is considered no-fly list. And nobody knew how to deal with that. And so there were many people who were subjected to that. Some people got off the list, some people still are there. So three Muslim Americans, they decided to file a lawsuit. And one of those people are with us, and case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And Justice Department says, well, the Circuit Court 2, which has allowed this individual to file a lawsuit on FBI individuals, cannot be done. But Supreme Court unanimously favored the no. Yes, they can file a lawsuit against FBI individuals. And one of that person is with us, Naveed Shenwari. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah.
Welcome to Muslim Network. Naveed Sherwani is one of the person who, along with two other American Muslim, filed this lawsuit. So now that you can fly, and Supreme Court says you can collect some money against the discrimination which you faced, are you happy with this?
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Thank you, first of all, for having me on the show. Definitely, when Supreme Court, we won that case at Supreme Court unanimously, it was a relief. Because, you know, these programs, especially the no-fly list and all these other lists, they affect a lot of Muslims around the country. And so it was definitely joyful to us that finally we're getting somewhere with this case.
And tell us how the whole thing is started. So you were in the coming with your mom to United States. When in Dubai, you were changing a flight. Instead of change of flight, you were taken for interrogation. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, this all started around 2011. And so I went to Hajj with my mom. And after that, we went to Afghanistan, where I got married that year too. So that was the end of 2011, beginning of 2012. While coming back in January of 2012, we were not allowed to board the flight to the United States. And obviously I had to stay several days in Dubai because they were not allowing me to come back to the country. So I had to, you know, there were several FBI agents that interrogated me at the consulate. And they, you know, I never understood what they meant. The more you help us, the more we're able to let you go. And so there was a lot of uncertainties, and they were outright like accusing me of certain things that I did not do. So when I came back, finally, we were allowed after 3, 4, or 5 days to the United States. Then, other FBI agents obviously were waiting at the airport for me. And then several of them visited my house. They visited my friends, family, and everyone. So it was, I believe, it was the March or April of 2012 that I was placed on a no-fly list.
So when they were threatening you and saying that if you help us, we'll help you. So what was the nature of threats and what type of help were they looking for?
Well, obviously, especially when I was placed on a no-fly list, at that time I did not have a job. And so I would be a contractor. I would go around usually to East Coast from Nebraska, because that's where we grew up in Connecticut, and then we moved to Nebraska. So I would go to Connecticut or other states as a contractor to work in manufacturing or production. So they would come to me, and obviously I was in a very vulnerable position at this time. I'm not able to work. I am being, followed, and my rights have been violated. I've been interrogated several times. So they would say that, you help us, we help you. We know you don't have money right now. We know you don't have a job right now. So one side, they'll play a good cop and bad cop with me. And that's how we know what they exactly meant by it.
Naveed Sherwani, let me ask you a little difficult question. In Chicago, when they were saying, people need to help us and all that, and who are the extremists, and I asked Chief of Police in Chicago, tell me what will tell us somebody is extremist. They gave me a list in which if somebody has just started a beard. Was that a case for you, or those type of things? So is it an issue of profiling along with asking them to become agent for informer for FBI?
Oh, well, my whole thing, at that time I didn't even have a beard, so that's one thing that I did not fit in.
Profiling based on
I did not fit into that list. But obviously they do look for trends. And as far as, we have done a lot of research, and recently we know that they look into, how do they define a moderate Muslim as compared to a conservative or a extremist or a fundamentalist. But, our deen we go to the fundamentals of our deen. So, but my whole story starts with when I was away from the deen, I had no problems. When Allah guided me back to the deen, that's where my issues started. So I knew that there's something going on. When I would go to the mosque, the masjid, and I would ask about specific issues about the deen, and when I was trying to learn more about the deen, that's where my whole issue started. So obviously I knew that there was something going on.
Wow. In that list where somebody just started beard was listed, this was also listed. If somebody has just started practicing faith and going regularly to mosque, and while he was not going before, it was one of these signs which was listed in that. Tell me, you were young when you came here, about 14-year-old, and you were not practicing your faith. And at that time, you were saying you did not face any problems, but when you started practicing your faith, that's where you started problem. When was it when you realized there's a discrimination against you, not the no-fly list, but other type of societal discrimination? When did you start noticing that?
Well, obviously, I think 9/11 had a lot to do with it. And that was I was 18, I believe, at that time. After 9/11, we certainly, all of us Muslims, I was in high school at that time in Connecticut, in East Coast, which is right next to New York. We always, felt the discrimination, and especially I was about 26 when Allah guided me to the deen, and so after that, obviously, I felt it way more, and with especially on a government level, and so that was later on. In my case.
Tell me, what is the state of your case right now?
So after the Supreme Court, our case went back to the original place that was filed, which is in New York. And so we're still waiting for further, as far as how far the case is going to go after this. For that, maybe the best thing would be my attorneys to ask.
How is what was the impact of this no-fly list on your job and life?
Well, brother, it had a profound effect on me. It had a lot of effect on my social life, as far as communicating with other people or commingling with other people and so forth. Because you are always on an alert. You kind of don't trust people that, this person might be someone that might set you up or something like that, or psychologically, you become more paranoid, because you feel like people are watching you. They're coming to your house, they're watching everything that you do. So you get, socially and psychologically, you could probably lead to a severe depression for you too. And financially, to this day, I'm dealing with repercussions of what happened to me. Tens of thousands of dollars of credit card debts and everything, because at times I have to still live, but I wouldn't be able to go and find a job. So I stay home. So I have to spend my money through credit cards and different things in order to pay for the bills and live my life. So in each and every way, it affected me profoundly. And I believe that this is very common in the Muslim community.
Do you know other Muslims wherever you have lived who faced a similar problem but chose not to file a lawsuit?
After filing for this, after I was part of this case, yes, I actually came and talked to quite a few Muslim brothers and sisters, not just in Nebraska, but across the country, who were afraid of speaking out because of the repercussions of course, of standing against the federal government in the intelligentsia, especially. But alhamdulillah, I was never afraid of that. What my aim was that if, I went through what they made me go through, and alhamdulillah, it made me a better Muslim, but I will not allow other Muslims to go through something like that. So if I can raise awareness regarding it, inshallah, I will always do it, and I will always go to interviews. That's what I used to tell my attorneys.
What was the reaction of other Muslims when they found out that you have filed a lawsuit? Were they telling you, hey, why are you doing it? Stop it, it's going to hurt you more? Or were they encouraging?
There were definitely some brothers and sisters that were very supportive. And there were some that said that, maybe you should stay away from this. Even within my family, there were certain people that were against this because of the repercussions that possibly I could face or my family could face. But alhamdulillah, that was not a question in my head. I was going ahead with this, and alhamdulillah, I had a very good team of attorneys. So this was something that I thought that was going to help the Muslim community, inshallah.
So, you have two other people who are in part of your lawsuit. Are you in touch with them also?
Once in a while, I've been in touch with them, yes. And I've seen them at certain occasions in New York.
So you say that the impact of all this turmoil was that you feel you have become a better Muslim. Let me ask you this. Have you increased in your trust in American system also, that if you can take a stand, the whole Supreme Court going to side with you?
Well, definitely. As I said, this is a positive moment. And so at certain times, you definitely lose hope because these agencies and the federal government has a lot of power. And so when you're going nowhere with this and taking years and years, and especially there's brothers that I still know they're in no-fly list for 8-9 years, you definitely don't have the trust in the courts or the system. But after such a step, it kind of makes you realize that maybe there's a hope. And so that's why I believe that this was a positive step. And definitely this was something that could be, inshallah, useful to Muslims in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Naveed Shinwari, for sparing your time to talk with us. And we hope that you are successful in the rest of the case.
Thank you very much. My message, just a message to brothers and sisters everywhere, would be to, inshallah, stand up for the haqq and always try your hard and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to support you in whatever you do, and He will, inshallah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Back to you, Samana.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.